let's get back to this, because there's some very important things going on here in the world of real estate in our country. We talk about, the glut on the market, that there aren't enough homes, and yet there's a whole nother side to this, Mark. We were talking a little bit off air. There are some people who are at risk.
There are, and we're starting to hear from them. As you can imagine, COVID wasn't great for a lot of people. Maybe their job was eliminated. But there are a few that we've heard from that went into COVID in a situation that wasn't great and were able to kind of fly under the radar through COVID because of all the governmental protections, and the banks weren't allowed to foreclose and evict. And now that we're starting to come out of COVID, the banks are coming fast and furiously and extremely aggressively. One situation we had a few weeks ago, shocking how aggressive the bank was being, thinking about the optics of it, right? We've talked about optics quite a bit, but they did not care. They were not worried about bad publicity or anything, and they were coming super aggressively after this gentleman who has equity in the home. Because of the appreciation of the property. If he were to sell it in the open market, he would be able to capture some of those proceeds, take them with him, dust off, figure things out, live another day. When the banks start coming, and the foreclosure costs are associated, and the auction happens, and a third-party bidder bids, they might not bid what would be the market price. So there's no proceeds for that person. They're only bidding enough that the bank is satisfied. So they're not concerned about the homeowner. So we're in the process of working through, getting this gentleman under agreement with a buyer that allows him to sell the house with dignity and not foreclosed and get the proceeds. And there's a lot of people in that situation. And if anyone's listening to this and they are in that situation and they're in distress and they don't think that there's a brighter day, that this is going to work out for them, that they'll be able to get back on their feet, this is the perfect time to be selling and capturing some of that equity that has accelerated rapidly over the last year, more than they probably could possibly imagine. They may think, oh, there's my mortgage statement, this is what I owe, this is where they're coming, Zillow says, or whatever it is that they think values their house. They're probably inaccurate, and they should certainly talk to a real estate professional to help them through that, because they could capture real dollars and then dust off and get back on their feet, as opposed to the process of foreclosure, which is brutal in and of itself, and it strips your equity. It clearly strips the amount of money that is otherwise yours, goes to somebody else, whether it's the bank or an investor.
So let me just translate some of this for a moment.
Okay.
So a person has a home worth $500,000.
Yeah.
And their mortgage is $250,000. That means the equity is $250,000, correct?
Correct. The difference between the value and the debt.
Okay. And the appreciation is not, oh, I really appreciate that. That's really great. That's the increase in value that your house or anything has.
That's right. So maybe in January 2020, that house was worth $350, and today it's worth $500.
Because
that's not uncommon.
Because there aren't enough houses.
Correct.
Okay. And yet, if it goes into foreclosure, the idea is somehow whoever the owner is has not been able to pay the bank the mortgage payment, basically the monthly rent, if you will. We call it a mortgage because it's a homeowner. And the bank says, I want my money. And they then have the legal right to say, we are going to auction off your house.
And again, they have every right to do that. They have the right. They've lent you this money. Right. You haven't paid it back. We want it. You've signed these documents that gives us the right. You've actually authorized us to do this at your closing. And we're going to proceed with it. The problem is they only want that $250.
Exactly.
So if somebody bids 251, they win.
They win.
And they own that property.
Yep. Right. And that's why I just wanted to translate it for people. So for those people, even though it may be anxiety provoking to not have a home, if you can sell your home for the 500 it's worth, you walk away with 250,000 in your pocket that you can at least potentially invest somewhere else.
Correct. Instead of nothing in your pocket and an eviction notice.
And is it harder then to get another mortgage? Because
It would.
It would be.
It would be. It's going to be challenging for that person anyhow, because going into the foreclosure process, but to go to a rental and to show, for example, this person that we're working with now, we showed them that they're getting money, right? So we showed the landlord, yes, they're in foreclosure, they're dusting off, they need a second chance, they're going to have real funds to pay you as a landlord.
Right.
Thank you for, looking the other way on their credit, because their credit is damaged.
Credit is damaged, but they're going to have cash in the bank, and they can pay their rent.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's going to define and it's going to widen that gap, unfortunately, between the haves and the have-nots. And you're going to see it's going to be tough to watch when certain communities are thriving.
Yeah.
And certain communities are not.
Yeah. So there's another trend that I've been noticing in the real estate world that has to do also, I think, a result of COVID and people realizing that they can work from home.
Yeah.
And that is the businesses, the corporations that used to have massive numbers of people in their offices, they may not need to have that much space anymore.
Right.
So what happens to the owners of those mega buildings?
So commercial real estate we're talking
real
about.
estate.
Yeah. That time will tell. It's interesting. Even 5 years ago, I was projecting that office space, the massive square footage that companies had, there's going to be an adjustment there because you were starting to see the cloud software, the laptops, the mobile employees, the ones that wanted to work from home a day, a week, or what have you.
But also because, Mark Stiles, you are brilliant and can anticipate these things.
I have a pretty cool crystal ball.
Yes, you do.
But at the end of the day, I was thinking, okay, well, it's interesting. There's this big building in Boston that is all square footage of business. What could they do with it? Maybe they retrofit it to residential.
Exactly.
And that was the idea that I'm thinking is there, and then the cities will become more of these communities. But with COVID, I don't know that I would think that way anymore because of the congested. Not people don't want to get on elevators with each other, and and they don't want to live in such close quarters. So time will tell. A lot of the owners of big multi-million-dollar commercial real estate are pretty savvy people. I'm assuming they're going to figure out how to retrofit and redevelop their concepts, but time will tell. But I can tell you that people are not going to go back to the office the way they did, and there's projections on what percentage of people are going to go back, and then you're starting to see some of the bigger banks and Wall Street companies who are mandating people to come back to the office. And then I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal talking about the new sign-on bonus is remote employment. You can work in Wyoming for a company in Boston, and then there's the whole conversation about, well, how do you pay someone Boston money when they're living in Wyoming? That's not fair, because a lot of the big Fortune 100 companies have these scales of what their compensation is. So if you're a middle manager in the Midwest, you get $90,000. But if you're a middle manager in Manhattan, you get $210,000. But now, what if that middle manager in the New York office is living in Midwest?
Yeah.
What happens there? So a lot of things are going to change, but I can certainly say that commercial real estate is the way we see it is going to be very different in the years to come.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of things certainly are changing and have changed, but here's one thing that hasn't changed, and that is our sponsors. I mean, we do get new sponsors because, who wouldn't want to sponsor the Dr. Joe Show? But what hasn't changed is we take commercial breaks and we give them a chance to tell us about themselves. So, Ben, let's take a commercial break.